Okay, I'm going to talk about the value of a life. So, we often place value on lives, economic value, I mean, and these are kind of decisions that politicians and government officials have to make. They have to. So if we're in a war, in a proxy war, for example, or we're in a war in the Middle East, right? If we drop a bomb on a building and we have a and maybe we kill one terrorist and 10 civilians. We have to weigh the value of those lives against the future potential of terrorism from the terrorist, right? So we basically weigh the value of those 10 civilian lives versus the value of the safety that is provided by killing the one terrorist. And this is one example, right? We could also apply this utilitarian perspective to healthcare. So we we can speak about universal healthcare versus market-driven healthcare, and maybe the market-driven healthcare, the free market-driven healthcare, maybe it provides healthcare advancements that basically, save more lives in the long run versus providing universal health care, and maybe the universal health care doesn't advance so quickly. These are decisions that people have to make, okay, and they're basically placing an economic value on a life. And beyond that, speaking about healthcare, if we don't have universal healthcare, you're basically deciding that the people with money, they can afford better healthcare and therefore perhaps a better, longer life compared to the people who can't afford healthcare. Again, it's a utilitarian perspective at the end of the day, but here's the thing. What this does is when you have people make these decisions, people at the top, the politicians and the government officials, when you put these decisions in the hands of a few people, you're basically taking people's lives out of their own hands, because what you're doing is you're enabling a few people to control the many, and this creates kind of bitterness, right? It creates some tension among the people who are less likely to be able to afford that health care, or among the people who are more likely to become the civilian casualties. It's unfair, right? And people say life is unfair, so get used to it. But the problem with that mentality is that ultimately these people are they're going to recognize the unfairness, and they're going to seek to make it fair. And if the government officials and then the ruling class and the militaries that work for them, if they continue to push if they continue to push this control that they have over these other people, then again it's going to create tension. It's going to create bitterness between the two groups of people. It's going to create division. And that division leads to civil war and real war, proxy wars, trade wars, all that stuff. The problem with allowing one, a few a small select group of people to control a larger group of people is that you're going to create these problems. You're going to create these divides between the ruling class and the working class, right? And poor people. You're going to create that tension. That tension is going to build into bigger and bigger problems. The trick here is democracy. The trick is democratization of everything, whether it's these decisions about healthcare, whether it's the decisions about war, or whether it's the decisions about anything in particular. So we I don't know. It seems to me that no matter what we do, when we have a republic, which is where we elect representatives to represent us, it seems to me like the end result is that we really bad at electing people that represent us. And it's because ultimately those people are going to represent their own interests. And the thing is, if you live in a first world country, you may have a hard time representing the interests of people in the Middle East, even if you are just a working class citizen in a first world country. You may have a hard time representing the interests of people in poor nations in Africa because you're not thinking about, you don't really care about the bombs that get dropped on them, right? And it's easy to not care because you can't see them. And that's ultimately the problem. It's like, if you can't see the problem, if you can't see how the problem is affecting you directly, you're just going to ignore it. Okay? But like I said, they do indirectly affect us. And the difference between a direct effect and an indirect effect is just time, right? It's just time and perhaps a less obvious effect, right? It's kind of a backdoor effect. There's a longer chain of events that it takes to wrap back around to you. And an example of this would be a supply chain disruption, right? You see inflation, in a first world nation. That inflation likely came from a supply chain disruption that was far away from, your original nation. But maybe you started a proxy war in Ukraine, or maybe you are waging a proxy war in Ukraine, and you caused that disruption. We have to see how all of these things are connected. We have to see how placing a value on a life across the world ends up affecting you, right? And if you don't value life on the opposite side of the planet in the same way that you value life in your household, again, the only difference is a direct versus an indirect effect. The only difference is time. And the way the world works now is that time frame has been drastically shrunk, right? It has shrunken a lot. Things affect one side of the world to the other very quickly. And that's because of the nature of the globalized economy. Again, whether it's a supply chain disruption that is caused by a proxy war, or, whether it's a real war, whether it's the killing of civilians that wraps around, and next thing you know, before long, people are recruiting ISIS members on Twitter, right? This happens so fast nowadays that it seems like it's more and more obvious to us, and yet we're ignoring it. We're refusing to change the ways that we make decisions. We're refusing to acknowledge the way that we are all connected now. It's like the difference between a direct and an indirect effect is they're becoming a lot more similar to each other. The difference is disappearing. And ultimately what that means is that we're going to need in the future, if these direct and indirect effects, if the indirect effects, if the time frame between an indirect effect and a direct effect keeps shrinking and shrinking, we're going to need to democratize the entire world under one government. And that's called globalism, right? People don't like globalism, but I mean, the world's economy is globalized, and this ultimately is going to call for the need for globalism, because otherwise you're going, especially with the weapons we have now, you're going to find yourself in trade wars that lead to proxy wars, that lead to real wars, that lead to nuclear wars, right? Or maybe you just have isolated wars that, again, you have the U.S. military killing civilians in the Middle East or in Africa, and then those civilians, they get bitter. They have resentment for the U.S. empire for their entire lives, and again, that over the course of decades, that builds a movement against the United States empire, and this is likely how 9/11 occurred, right? It's like all of these things are connected, and if we only see the direct effects, if we only see the direct violence that occurs when some terrorist comes in and bombs some nightclub or something, if that's the only thing we see, but we don't see the indirect economic effects that drain the U.S. population's ability to afford health care, or that stagnate the wages of the U.S. citizens and ultimately lead to early deaths, then we're not seeing the full picture. There are a lot of indirect effects that, again, there's not really a difference between direct and indirect effects, except for the time frame, and that time frame is shrinking. So you have to think outside the box a little bit. You have to look at the full picture to understand how to make a world that will work well for everybody. We cannot devalue life because we cannot see that life. And you could apply this to animals if you wanted to. You know, we can't devalue the importance of diverse life forms in a I don't know, in a rainforest somewhere, because we need to build houses, because that lack of diversity, okay, as we kill off those species, it's going to harm us, okay? Like, we all live in an ecosystem together. We have to keep that ecosystem healthy, worldwide. Otherwise, we are going to suffer worldwide. It's common sense, really. It's like, if you want to keep a city functional, you have to take care of the whole city. And when the entire world is working together, when the entire economy is globalized, you have to keep the entire world healthy. Otherwise, it's not going to function very well. So just give that a little thought. Okay, think about the difference between direct and indirect effects, and realize that they're not really different from each other. Okay, we are all here for probably at least 50 years, hopefully 70 or 80, or even more, and those indirect effects, they become direct effects at some point in your life. Okay, and that means that your decision to devalue life across the planet because you can't see it, because you can't feel the pain they're feeling, is going to bring pain back on you one way or another. Okay, and that's all we're trying to do here on this planet. We're all just trying to reduce the pain we feel day in and day out. You know, some pain is good, but when I want to feel pain, I want to be the one inflicting that pain on myself. I want to choose when I feel that pain, whether it's going on a run, or going to the gym and exercising, you know, or doing some hard physical labor. You want to be the one in control of the pain that you feel. You don't want that pain to come as a surprise, whether it's through some chronic disease caused by a broken food industry, or whether it's some proxy war, whether it's economic stress. You want to be in control of your pain, and the way you do that is by being empathetic to the pain of people on the other side of the planet. So thanks for watching.